Hi, I'm Ken Howard, and welcome to the Gay Therapy LA podcast. Today, I want to talk about supporting gay men leaving religion, reclaiming your identity with secular alternatives. So, as a gay men specialist and psychotherapist and certified sex therapist and life career relationship coach for over 30 years, one of the themes I hear from my clients is about how they have been mistreated by their religious institutions in the past, either in their upbringing as children or as young adults, especially around the time of coming out. And this is even a theme or topic issue in articles and discussions in the broader mental health arena, including straight people of all genders, about being survivors of religious abuse. And while it certainly happens to straight people, LGBT people of all kinds get the brunt of it. And among these, still probably gay men, although trans people, especially trans women, are also the very specific targets lately of right-wing bigotry, politically from Republicans in America or the conservative parties in other countries, such as the UK, in a combination of oppression that is both political and religious. For gay men, religion has been a double-edged sword. It can be a source of community and comfort and guidance for us as young boys, as young people, but also a place of rejection and judgment and trauma, especially once our non-gender conforming behavior or sexual orientation is known to others. The teachings and traditions that are supposed to offer love and salvation in religious practice can become, for some, weapons of shame, guilt, and emotional abuse. So if you're a gay man struggling with religious trauma or in the process of leaving your religion due to religious abuse, you're not alone. This journey can be incredibly challenging, but it also can be an opportunity to reclaim your identity and find new sources of meaning and connection and joy. Let's talk about the psychological toll of religious abuse. Religious abuse can take many forms: verbal condemnation, exclusion from religious communities, pressure to conform to heterosexual norms, or even harmful conversion therapy or reparative therapy, or lately more clever names to disguise these practices as they've become more illegal or become illegal in more and more states and countries and territories. And these experiences can leave deep psychological scars, including feelings of worthlessness, anxiety, depression, isolation, and even suicidal ideation. The core of the abuse lies in the belief that your authentic self is incompatible with your faith, a false and damaging message that can create a sense of inner conflict and rejection of the self. The challenge of leaving religion. For many gay men, leaving their religion is not just about rejecting harmful beliefs, it's about leaving behind a whole way of life. Religious communities can often provide a sense of belonging, a moral framework, and a purpose that can be hard to replace. The fear of the unknown, of losing these rewards, can make it difficult to walk away, even when staying feels unbearable. And this is why it's crucial to find secular alternatives that can fulfill these needs in ways that affirm your identity as a gay man rather than deny it. Or in the case of the current Catholic Church Pope, these nonsensical half-validations like love the person, love the sinner, hate the sin, or love the gay man, but he can't ever act on it. That's a mixed message of affirmation followed by a serious devaluation, saying that the only legitimate gay men are those who remain celibate. Historically, gay men have been the victims of religious abuse and persecution the world over, more so than any other letter groups in LGBT. And part of this is because of the need to punish men for gender non-conforming behavior, the tyranny of the majority, and the misogynistic notion that a man who is not gender conforming, meaning in any way approximating the lowly woman, is debasing himself, becoming a traitor to the gender, forfeiting or squandering his male privilege, and is therefore worthy of the most imaginable punishments, so that the patriarchy and toxic masculinity can be preserved in their eyes. I've written before how gender nonconformity can trigger not just discomfort, but a murderous rage, which is interesting, although vile, as a phenomenon that manifests in many cultures and nations throughout history. We always have to ask why gender nonconforming behavior or presentation provokes rage in some, because it can and has led people to act in some of the most violent interpersonal ways possible, such as the gay panic defense in murder, or even the mutilation of gay men or trans women. We hear about this a lot, especially with the anti-trans political rhetoric. Trans women are murdered, and not just murdered, but mutilated. An extra level of rage and violence about those acts. And yet topics like don't say gay, such as the Florida law, have the support of literally tens of millions of American citizens, and even more across the globe. And while there can be a secular aspect of homophobia, just people seeing it as incongruent with what they know, or different or odd, homophobia and transphobia remain very specifically religiously based the world over. In America, religious abuse is usually from the most aggressive anti-gay factions, such as American Evangelical Protestant Christianity, who've been responsible for sending ambassadors of these ideas abroad to cultivate government support very systematically in lobbying for the so-called Kill the Gays bills in Uganda and other countries in Africa and the world. But we also see vehement anti-gay rhetoric and actual behavioral oppression from Catholicism or Islam. Many Muslim governments, such as Iran, have imprisoned and executed gay men, including teenagers. Orthodox Judaism, the Mormon Church, Church of Latter-day Saints, Jehovah's Witnesses, or even more minority religions like Wicca have had heterosexist ideas like the male sun god and the female moon goddess as the only legitimate binary that they purport. Other anti-gay rhetoric has come from the Baha'i faith, or Sikhs, or even some conservative facets of Buddhism, with controversial anti-gay comments coming from seemingly progressive world figures like the Dalai Lama, or, as I said, the most progressive Catholic Pope yet in history. And it's a cumulative, pervasive effect in many American states and countries, Western, Eastern, and throughout history. Even the more religious aspects of Alcoholics Anonymous have alienated many of the gay men that I work with who are trying to recover from substance abuse problems. I work with these guys and help them to take in the best aspects of the program and leave the rest, as they say. But it's a stress on gay men who have been abused by religious institutions to get a lot of God talk, even in gay AA rooms, and they're left to deal with reconciling the benefits that that program offers for substance recovery with the religious content, such as reciting the Lord's Prayer at meetings, that they can find intrusive and offensive when they associate that with their historical oppression. Even beyond a client's history of hearing anti-gay rhetoric, what I call the sick, bad, wrong syndrome, some, not all, guys have experienced sexual abuse in religious settings. This can be when they were little boys from priests, which is of course a widespread dramatic issue in the Catholic Church worldwide, for which they have paid millions and millions of dollars in legal fees and lawsuit settlements with these survivors. Others have experienced the torturous experience of pray away the gay, or reparative therapy, or conversion therapy camps or programs or counseling programs, or more recently, dealing with unwanted same-sex attraction as a euphemism for reparative therapy. And the legal battles go on in the fight about protecting people, especially minors, from this charlatanism versus what the other side calls, oh, religious freedom or freedom of choice to undergo that kind of so-called therapy if they choose, despite it not being a legitimate mental health psychotherapy intervention model. And it's condemned by every major mental health professional association among pediatricians and psychologists and clinical social workers like me, counselors and psychiatrists. Other religious oppression has come not from the religious institution itself, but how that is heard and interpreted and integrated into parental behavior and brought into the home as part of daily life. Bad parents can act as the agents of the religious institution, creating an atmosphere of religious oppression, but in your average neighborhood home. And this includes possible misinterpretation or making up rules for behavior in the household that maybe or maybe not the religious institution would recommend or know about or approve. Some parents improvise and control their children in ways that they just make up in what they consider to be an interpretation of religious institution teachings or gender role rules and expectations in the family. I've heard stories, from guys who have been my clients about how religious-based rules were enforced in their house, including actions that are emotionally and physically abusive. Most of these oppressive parenting rules often include isolation away from the mainstream culture, such as homeschooling, not being allowed to watch TV, not allowing to hear secular radio, not allowing internet access, such as numerous Christian internet filters for desktops and smartphones that not only block what they consider objectionable content, but also report on the browsing history, a spying capacity. And my research has shown that there are many of these filters and apps that are commercially available and marketed to conservative so-called Christian parents. In my practice, I work with a lot of gay men with a history of trauma to help them overcome these experiences and heal from their traumatic experiences in a more and more profound level. Not all of their traumatic experiences of the guys I work with are religious based. Some are survivors of sexual assault or severe accidents or illnesses or interpersonal violent crime or workplace bullying or domestic abuse and violence, but many have a traumatic memory association with religious material and experiences. In trauma, we tend to avoid stimuli that reminds us of any aspect of the traumatic experience, especially with our 5 senses of sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste that can be triggering. Or it could be proximity of the space that you're in, such as being in a church. Gay men can have great discomfort even if they don't attend church regularly, if they visit a church for a wedding or a funeral, for example. In psychology, we tend to move away from pain or the things we associate with pain and move toward the things we associate with pleasure or fun or comfort or well-being in what Sigmund Freud called the pleasure principle, which of course the animal kingdom responds to as well. You give a dog a treat when she does a trick that you're training her to do, and that's a positive reinforcement of the behavior that brings pleasure, which B.F. Skinner wrote about as operant conditioning of behavior. I've written before about how gay men can reclaim their spirituality from these bad experiences with religious institutions. It is our right, just like anyone else, to have and practice the kind of spiritual expression that we want for ourselves, whether that is in a more formal religion or if it's your own version of spirituality, which is often what AA encourages, despite their undermining of this message by reciting a specifically Christian Lord's Prayer as a ritual. But they encourage a God of our understanding, which can be very empowering. For the anti-gay folks, being gay is a sin worthy of stripping away legal rights and worthy of oppression, from discrimination to legal hate crimes or to some systematic extermination by the government of all LGBT people, including gay men and more lately trans people, as we've seen that as a political tool to scapegoat trans people and use them as a political pawn, as groomers or whatever, or bad for children, because relatively speaking, those groups can get away with that with actually very little societal pushback. They also oppress women with relatively little pushback, which is curious because women of all kinds are a big group worldwide, but remain a group in society vulnerable to oppression, again, the world over. So it's understandable that in avoiding pain action, which even can be unconscious, gay men would avoid all things religious. But when we avoid these triggers to preserve our dignity and our sanity and our mental health and well-being, we're also losing any positive associations we had by history with religion. Maybe you liked singing the hymns in church or singing in the choir for music appreciation. Maybe the family would go out to eat to your favorite restaurant for lunch after church every Sunday. Or maybe a guy that we liked in the congregation we had a crush on was sitting a few pews over. Maybe we associate religious services or rituals with family time, with grandparents or cousins or siblings or others that we had fun with. Maybe some of the religious messaging was actually affirmative and positive about life and was inspirational or comforting. So that association with religion can have some positive aspects to it too that can make us feel conflicted, that by avoiding all of that, we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So what do we do then? My point here is that gay men need support for the decision to distance themselves from the religious institutions and practices of their past that were negative or abusive, but they also need support for how to replace the good parts of that without a sense of loss or even betrayal by these institutions. Which brings us to what I like to call a secular solace. Religious people often use their religion for many functions, including for emotional solace during challenging times, getting out of themselves and giving it, whatever the situation is, up to a higher power, which can make them ironically feel empowered that they are invoking help from above. Religions also help to structure and make sense of the world and all the flora and fauna and creatures and operations in it, especially for those who believe in creationism and their literal understanding of how the entire universe came to be, which they consider, erroneously, to be history and science, but also faith. Religious cultures historically have helped human civilizations make sense of the natural world around them, to have explanations for why things are the way they are, just like in Greek mythology. A more modern term for creationism is intelligent design, meaning that someone, presumably a god, made things in nature the way they are by some grand design so that it all fits together. Let's talk more about secular solace. So in what I call secular solace, gay men who do not want to identify with any religious institution can, in essence, replace those comforts with other ways of thinking. For example, many religious people have a sense of the circle of life and developmental challenges throughout the lifespan, fulfilling what they consider to be God's purpose for their life, from childhood to teen years to early adulthood, middle age, and seniorhood, and even birth and death. Developmental psychology also addresses the developmental stages that people go through during the lifespan, such as Dr. Erik Erikson or Dr. Harry Stack Sullivan or Dr. Margaret Mahler and others in developmental psychology. And in my practice, I often use the developmental phases to help my clients understand where there are certain challenges and rewards that come with how old you are, such as most of us know the midlife challenges in your late 30s or early to mid 40s. A lot of the guys I work with are at midlife. I'll work with younger or much older, but the majority tend to be in midlife because that's when a lot of stuff happens for us emotionally and socially and relationally and professionally. So it's a good time to be in therapy or to undergo coaching. Instead of necessarily relying on God for comfort through the lifespan and our sense of purpose, we can take a more secular view that is more about our social and interpersonal and appreciation in nature for how we progress through life. We can appreciate that every age in our human nature brings challenges and rewards that are predictable and right on time. We don't try to be as fast and strong as we were in youth at middle age, but maybe as seniors we have more peace and life perspective than we did when we were younger. Erickson said that for every age or phase of life, there is always a challenge and a reward that is associated with that phase of life. And we have to cope with that. There is no way to have all the advantages but none of the disadvantages of each stage of life. We can also take a secular approach to relationships. Religious people can talk about their relationship with God or Jesus or other figures or deities in their tradition, but we can take a secular view of this where maybe we don't hear the voice of God in our hearts as much as we hear our own trusted instincts naturally of wisdom in our gut feelings and intuition. Much of our personal values and boundaries come from what feels right for us in our value system, which might differ from person to person. Issues such as whether you have a monogamous or a consensual non-monogamous relationship, for example, can be informed by our own inner value system of what we're comfortable with. And maybe that's in a cultural context too, but and in the context of our personality. What kind of work we do, how we treat others, how we vote especially, would be an expression of our personal value system. For religious people, marriage means not only their relationship to their spouse, but a relationship that has been joined together by God, especially in Catholicism, which historically has looked down on divorce. A secular support for relationships can be around things like the brotherhood of man, or the idea of the spiritual soulmate, or even just a very secular idea of love and nature that doesn't necessarily have a spiritual component to it unless we want it to. Weddings, for example, can have a religious aspect to them, or be a secular ritual that has a civic and legal aspect to the relationship. And this was part of the fight for marriage equality or same-sex marriage, was the argument that, two straight atheists could get married. Marriage was not limited to being a religious ritual, but a civic and legal and social one. And this has been true even in history, as it was in the medieval times about property and family influence, or among royal families. A secular appreciation of nature can be not necessarily saying that God created man and other animals and flora and fauna, but these are aspects of nature as a whole. For some, and including the more earthbound religions like Wicca, almost worship nature as the spiritual force of the universe. One phrase that I've used that implies that we can appreciate nature and how it all works is, we don't need a God, we have a flower. Meaning that we don't necessarily need more than what nature gives us, because what nature gives us is already so abundant and complex and wonderful. Some would interpret God as just nature, or just love. A secular appreciation of sex can certainly be not a mandate to procreate, like some straight people see it as, but as an extension of an appreciation of nature by celebrating the natural functions and instincts of our bodies, straight, gay, whatever. The natural functions of eating, drinking, temperature control, peeing, pooping, sleeping, and healing can be aspects of nature and not necessarily religious. Although religion has been applied to food, such as the Holy Eucharist or communion ritual representing the crucifixion and the body and blood of Christ, or the ritual eating of seasonal fruits or vegetables, or even making a toast with champagne can have a magical or spiritual quality by a group of people affirming a statement and sealing it with a sip of drink like an incantation. Certainly, blood has taken on a religious aspect to it in its symbolism as the fuel of life. Even gay men's tendency to celebrate the body by way of exercise or male physique development and aesthetic appreciation via the gym can be a celebration of nature and probably our genetics as well. Some gay men who leave their religion can feel a loss of a sense of culture. Religion certainly formed the underpinnings of culture when you think of Christmas and Easter in Christianity, or Ramadan in Islam, or Yom Kippur in Judaism, and all of the holy holidays. But we can still access the cultural value of observing ritual and customs and traditions that have their origins in religion, but in a secular way. We can adapt them if we want to. I've written before, and I think I had another podcast episode about a secular appreciation of Easter and a cultural examination of that, or a secular appreciation of Christmas, in which I discuss ways to appreciate the themes of death and rebirth every winter and spring, or a sense of renewal in every year, such as the holiday season, where the birth of the Son, S-O-N, Jesus Christ, in Christianity was laid upon the existing cultural ritual of the birth of the sun, S-U-N, in Wicca as the start of the longer daylight hours after the winter equinox. I know some Jewish guys who have a Christmas tree for the secular joy and cultural appreciation of it. And I know perhaps more rarely some non-Jewish guys who might appreciate and observe Yom Kippur as the Day of Atonement in Judaism and reflection on our lives and actions and values. While some might get angry that, ooh, that's cultural appropriation in a rage, we see how that rage is against anything that is not purist in their religion, which can provoke a need to punish. But where is that line? Even every Christian family who celebrates Christmas might observe it in a different way, opening presents on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, or even waiting until the Feast of the Epiphany in early January. Or Jewish families might vary how they observe the Passover Seder dinner, or have different types of menorahs in their home at Hanukkah. So there's always variation in how people and individuals interpret and observe long-held holidays and traditions. So let's look at support now for leaving religion and replacing the rewards of religion with secular alternatives. Leaving religion doesn't mean abandoning the things that gave your life meaning. It means finding new ways to meet those same needs without the baggage and shame and rejection and the negative associations of religious institution experiences. So here are some key areas to focus on. Let's do 4 of them. Number 1 is community. Religious communities often provide a sense of belonging and connection. Replacing this with a secular community can be vital. So you might consider joining LGBT groups or groups that are part of your profession or part of your neighborhood or something else that is a trait that is part of your identity, or doing volunteer work that has meaning for a cause that you find valuable in your value system, or connecting with like-minded individuals through social activities that celebrate your identity. Number 2 is a sense of purpose. Religion often gives people a sense of purpose or calling. Reclaim your purpose by focusing on your passions and values. This might mean dedicating time to activism, or pursuing creative endeavors, or building relationships that align with your authentic self, or choosing a vocation or a profession that is an expression of your personal values. Such as my history as a gay men's specialist psychotherapist, when years ago I was inspired to help support the life and worth and dignity and well-being of gay men after the harrowing years of the AIDS crisis. For spirituality, while organized religion may no longer resonate with you, although it certainly still could in your own way, spirituality doesn't have to be tied to dogma. Practices like mindfulness, meditation, and connecting with nature can provide a sense of peace and fulfillment without the constraints of a formal religious doctrine. Or number 4 is a moral framework. Many people stay in their religion out of fear of losing a sense of right and wrong. And the truth is, morality is not exclusive to any one religion. There are variations and interpretations, and even conflicts. As a gay man, you can cultivate a moral framework for yourself based on empathy and compassion and justice that honors both your values and your identity. You own the adult prerogative to take responsibility for navigating your life according to your values, to do what feels right for you, and to set limits against doing things that don't feel right to you, either for yourself or other people, when you need to set boundaries. Guys I work with who are recovering from substance abuse problems, or guys who feel like they're having too much or the wrong kind of sex or with the wrong people, that they find it demoralizing rather than fulfilling. They need support for identifying and then aligning with their own values that are still affirmative of who they are as gay or perhaps bisexual or pansexual men. Seeking professional support. Leaving a religion after experiencing religious abuse can be a lonely and confusing process. Many gay men feel torn between their desire to live authentically and the lingering guilt and fear instilled by years of religious indoctrination. And this is where professional support can make all the difference. As a psychotherapist specializing in gay men's issues, I understand the unique challenges of navigating religious trauma and the process of leaving a faith that has caused you harm. I can help you work through these complex emotions and explore your options for building a fulfilling life outside of religion, and develop practical strategies for replacing the rewards of your faith with secular alternatives. Or I can help you to adapt your original faith to be affirmative in who you are now. And there are many spiritual resources for this, for gay men who want to do this. Sometimes it's not an either-or situation or replacing of all things religious with a secular alternative. Sometimes it's an adaptation and a customization of what we were brought up with to fit who we are now, especially as out gay men. I think some guys forget that's your option. If you're feeling overwhelmed or unsure of how to move forward, I invite you to reach out. Together, we can create a path to healing and empowerment that honors who you truly are without the weight of religious abuse holding you back. So how to take the next step? If any of this resonates with you, you're not alone, and you don't have to go through this journey on your own. I offer specialized psychotherapy to residents of California in America and life coaching services nationwide and worldwide to help gay men navigate the challenges of religious trauma and life transitions. So if you're ready to take the next step in reclaiming your identity and building a fulfilling secular or spiritual life, I encourage you to contact me for a consultation. Either email ken@gaytherapyla.com. Let me repeat that, Ken, K-E-N, at gaytherapyla.com. Or very similar, ken@gaycoachingla.com. Those are the two separate websites of the professional services that I offer, and I can explain some very important legal and ethical differences between what psychotherapy is and what life coaching is. So either of those, ken@gaytherapyla.com or ken@gaycoachingla.com, those emails will reach me. Or call or WhatsApp me at 310-339-5778. So 310-339-5778. Let's work together to help you find peace and purpose and joy, but on your terms. I'll see you next time.